There might be habits and patterns that aren't serving you in your life. They are no reflection of who you are. The brain, the body, everyone's ability to change continues throughout life.
For somebody who is ready to do the work, they're feeling overwhelmed, they're tired of feeling stuck, where do they begin?
Now, I think the great place to begin, and I'm saying that in a much more loaded way than I think maybe that answer first hits, because change really begins, and I talk about this concept a lot in consciousness, in the present moment. And the reality that most of us are living is not grounded in the now moment or in presence. Most of us are living, as I like to, or as many of us have probably heard of it referred to, from our autopilot, based in our past, repeating habits and patterns that aren't serving us, yet we are continuously stuck in them for that main foundational reason, because we're not fully present. We're not present to access new choices. And that's where change really begins, is through choice.
Okay, well, let's get really practical here. You said we need to get to the present moment. Let's talk about what that looks like.
Absolutely. So the first place I like to reference, and one of the biggest reasons I even refer to myself as the holistic psychologist, is really honoring our whole person. For a very long time in my field in particular, we had us as humans kind of lopped off from the neck down in a lot of ways. And of course, I became a doctor of the mind. So there's been this belief that, by just changing the way we think about things or doing things different mentally, that we can affect change. And what I've found time and time again with clients that I would see week after week after year is that that's not the whole, pun intended, really, story. And that until we really incorporate our body into the present moment for the sake of this conversation, or into our journey to create change, the mind is not enough. Of course, it's very powerful. So how do we become present to now? We can use our body and we can harness. I like to talk about something that's called a census check-in. So we all walk around and we're all sensing the environment, whether or not we're aware of it or not. We're taking in the aromas, the scents, we're seeing things kind of tactily, we're coming up against energy and actual physical objects in our environment. And all of that is being registered by our body. But most of us aren't conscious. All of that's happening behind the scenes, if you will. So to become conscious to here and now might mean, and I always reference our cell phones because most of us walk around with them now day in and day out. And for a lot of us, it might mean setting an alarm on your phone. And I call this a consciousness check-in. Set it for maybe 2 random times during your waking day. So maybe my alarm will go off at 12 p.m. and maybe 3 p.m. And when that alarm goes off, it's kind of a 2-part process. The first part is a check-in. How conscious am I? Are you really fully immersed when that alarm dings in whatever it is that you're doing? Say you're reading an article, having a conversation with a loved one. Are you fully present? Are you there? Or most of us will find, I'm in that moment. There's a loved one talking at me, or I'm reading a book, but I'm not really present. I'm lost in thought. I'm rehashing an argument I had with my partner this morning, or I'm worrying about a meeting to come. So that's the first stage of the check-in. And if you indicate the latter, I'm not present, my mind is somewhere else, my attention is somewhere else, then the next step is really important, which is becoming conscious and using your senses. Even just taking that brief moment, now that I've become aware that I'm not really here, I'm not in my body, tuning in, checking in. What can my body feel? What can I smell? What can I sense in this moment? And the more consistently we practice those check-ins, the more we can see how unconscious we've been living again. And that's where all of our autopilots are calling the show. We're kind of walking robots in that moment. And then when we do find that out, is the case for most of us, the more consistently we practice that consciousness check-in, the more now we get to make new choices. We don't have to live by those old habits. We can begin to do new things that can advance us to the future that we'd like to create for ourselves.
So if we begin this practice using the cell phone alarm and we're realizing we're not present when we get that check-in, and we start doing the practice at that time and tuning into our environment using our senses, is the idea that more and more as we do that over time, we're going to be more present throughout the day and not just during those check-in times?
Absolutely. That would be the goal. And so while in the beginning, a lot of people, when you begin to practice that, so listeners who maybe have tried this out or will try this out, it takes a lot of effort. And what we are then, kind of faced with for most of us is all of the stuff we've been distracting ourselves from for good reason. We might come into contact with thoughts, with feelings and sensations in our body that are uncomfortable. So with all of that effort that these moments take, we're actually laying down new neural networks, to really simplify it, in our brain. We're teaching our brain to fire in a new way, to kind of upshift in a sense. And I'm really simplifying all this from that autopilot that lives in our subconscious mind to a part of our mind known as the prefrontal cortex. And so the more we fire it in those moments and consistently fire this really powerful part of our brain, the more than likely we are able to access that throughout our day. And it really does come down to the hardware in a lot of ways. So a lot of us are living in that autopilot and haven't really accessed this really powerful place where consciousness lives for a long time. So the more we practice, we're firing our brain. All of this effort does then translate into it becoming a bit easier for us to access that. And the reason why we want to have access to our conscious mind is because that's how we can become present to what is happening in the moment and help us to then navigate that moment based in what's here. Most of us are operating in patterns that have come from past moments, but aren't necessarily what's mapping on in front of us.
Well, let's get into the finer details of when we get to that point where we're more in the present moment, because this is going to be a relatively new thing for a lot of us, an area that we're not very used to. So say we find ourselves more and more throughout the day when we're doing dishes or having that conversation with a friend or family member, we are conscious, we are present. It's like, okay, that's great. I'm making progress, but now what do I do while I'm being more conscious at a granular level?
Yes. So again, what we will probably be faced with is all like you were just describing, all of these new thoughts, all of these new feelings and new options in any given moment. And so what that looks like for each of us, really looks like returning. I like to call it a returning because what most of us are looking for is, these elusive words for many of us, like guidance, intuition. How do I know, what's right for me, or how do I know what to do next, or what path I'm on, or what journey to take. And again, a lot of us look outside of ourselves for those answers. We look to see what worked for friends. We look to loved ones. We seek advice. And of course, all of that plays a role. Though, in my opinion, the real guidance that we're looking for is a more internal one. So while a lot of us look for the prescription, right? How can I check all of these boxes and know what's right for me? And this is, again, where what we do in the given moments with this information is a little more individualized, because that means then dropping in and first maybe checking with my body. Is my body having an unmet need in this moment? Is it hungry? Does it need rest? And then, of course, can I make the choice to meet my body's need? And I'm saying this, and I'm going to labor over this just for a minute. A lot of us are meeting needs of our body, or we're tending to our body, I should say, but we're not really meeting our body's needs. Some of us have been so disconnected from our body for so long that, we eat at different times throughout our day. However, the question is, are we really eating when our body's hungry? Are we giving our body nutrients that help it to feel alive and awake and give us access to our very powerful brain? Or are we always feeling tired, exhausted, and we can barely get through the day? And a lot of us fall into that later group, and we're tending to our body because our body is continuing to survive, but we're not actually meeting its needs. And then, of course, even more complicated layers, we're peeling back that onion. Once I'm connected to my body and I'm able to determine whether or not I need to meet a physical need in the moment, now I have this whole complicated world of emotions as humans, right? How do I navigate when I'm feeling angry, when I'm feeling sad? And all of this happens when I'm first connected to myself. So in that present awareness, in that conscious state, we now have access, like I was saying, to all of these different choices. Is my body having a need? Can I meet it? What's going on for me emotionally? Is that indicating something that I need to tend to in my environment? And then again, can I make a choice that gets me closer to the future that I want? Because something I want to highlight is we're all making choices throughout our day. Most of us, though, our subconscious mind is filling in the choice that we always do at this moment in time, or the way we always feed our body, or the thing we always do when we're sad. And by the time most of us have reached adulthood, we've accumulated numerous negative consequences of some of the choices that we habitually make. So in that moment, this is where it gets a little bit more nuanced, individualized, we at least have access now to figure out from that deeper place the choice that's in alignment with what I want.
And is that an important piece early on for people to figure out what they want, what their goals are, and because again, now that they're grabbing the reins and they're going to have some control and get out of that autopilot, they're going to be able to start steering the ship towards, the life and the goals that they want. So how do they go about figuring that out, and how do they go about navigating that?
Right. And I to speak to your point, I want to begin with the ending, which is it's a navigational journey in a lot of ways. So just sharing my own story. When I came upon first the realization that this whole old way I was thinking about the mind is separate from the body, and really began to explore all of the ways in which I, as a personal human, was stuck, how I wasn't able to create change in the directions that I wanted to in my life, and how I saw very much those same stuck patterns in many of my clients. So when I began my journey, I realized one glaring thing, and it really kind of hitches onto this conversation right now, which is I was disconnected. I was totally disconnected from my body, and I was very much disconnected from my emotions. So at that time, if you were to begin to even throw out words like passion, purpose, the bigger things, that we're looking for, I would have looked at you like you were crazy. I wouldn't have resonated with those words in general. I couldn't even tell you what I wanted to eat for dinner because I had so much of a deep-rooted habit of never asking myself. I always made all of my decisions based on the world around me, people around me, what I imagined others wanted or needed of me in any given moment. And for 2 decades plus, I was well into my 20s, I never really checked in with myself in this very conscious way that we're talking about. So going on to say, a lot of us aren't going to know those deeper things, our passion, our purpose. We might have heard those words used and never really applied them for ourselves until we begin this journey. So just as much as we're learning how to reconnect with my physical body, and for me, my emotional self, that all took time to then give me the clarity, kind of unfolds our passion, our purpose, the bigger things that we're looking for, the more intimately knowing or connected we become to ourselves. So the more we take these moments to check in with ourselves throughout the day, the more then we get clarity, not only on what do we want to eat for dinner, but these bigger questions. What relationship is right for me? What career path is right for me? The deeper stuff. And the more connected we get to asking ourselves the question along the way, the more confident and empowered we get in our answers. Because now we're not just taking someone else's word for it, or because the newest book said to do it. We've kind of become our own litmus test because we get more connected with choices that we're consciously making for ourselves.
For somebody who this is brand new to, and they start tuning in and feeling the feelings that come up, and getting really into the thoughts that are going through their head, because maybe up until this point, they've been distracted with social media and different things, and their mind's just been bouncing around. Let's talk about how somebody can go about working through those thoughts and those emotions in a healthy way, because we don't want people to become present, all of a sudden have all these things coming at them, and then not have the tools to know how to navigate that.
Absolutely. And to speak to a point I was making earlier, there's a reason. There's a very good reason why, if you're out there listening and you're disconnected, or you suspect you might be, or you might be, or that there's some deep-rooted pain in you, there's a good reason why we've not been conscious to it all along, because we're very adaptive creatures, and we come out as little infants being very adaptive and learning how we need to fit into whatever environment it is that we were born into. And we do just that. We learn to squash certain feelings. If we were told not to show sadness, it's weak, or whatever messages. And this isn't just the direct things that a lot of us, I think, are told in childhood. It's all of the indirect ways not only that we are shown how, right, to kind of live in the world, it's how we're watching other people. So this is where the impact is far beyond what we're told. The old mantra, do as I say, not as I do, really doesn't hold as much weight, because as children, we're watching everyone around us, and we're watching all of our caretakers around us, and we're going to learn based on also what we're seeing them do or them not do. So the short of it is, a lot of us have conditioning, a way of being that isn't really fully, kind of acknowledging of all of our whole self and all of our different needs. And a lot of us have began to adapt in childhood. So of course, when we're well into adulthood and we're, trying to make sense of it and we're becoming conscious of all of this, of course, we're going to meet with what I call resistance. And that either lives in our mind or our bodies or both. And sometimes it looks like all of the endless thoughts and reasons why not to do this new thing, why it's too hard, why you should be using your time elsewhere, why it's not really working, it's for someone else. Or if it drops into our bodies, as it does for some of us, we might just feel agitated in a new way. We might come to witness some energy inside of us that's uncomfortable, or just simply we don't feel like we're used to feeling. And if we give too much attention to those thoughts in our mind or those feelings in our body, before very long, and this is why a lot of us remain stuck, we're right back into repeating those old patterns. Because according to our subconscious mind, it prefers this autopilot. It loves to coast on it because it's predictable. It gets to know what comes next. So even though logically what comes next doesn't serve us anymore, it's preferable. So we're going to meet that discomfort in this form of resistance anytime we try to do something different. So to speak to your point, there's value in not creating a new to-do list where I do 10 new things starting tomorrow and my whole day is revamped from morning until night, because that desire to stay the same is going to be really challenged. That resistance is going to get stronger if we try to do too much new at once. So the first suggestion I give to anyone trying to create and maintain change, because that's what we're looking to do here, to not make a new choice once, to consistently make a new choice day after day, is to keep the choices small. I have a concept that I call a small daily promise, and we use it in my global virtual self-healing membership, the SelfHealer Circle. And it's that idea of picking one small thing you're going to consistently do for yourself today, tomorrow, and the next day, for a week, couple weeks of time, and staying committed to that one small promise, because that will set us up to work through the resistance that will come, all of the reasons why not to even do that small thing, because it's so small, why bother? Nothing will happen. And it will teach you that empowerment to keep that commitment anyway. And then, of course, what the small promise can be anything. It can be flossing your teeth, while you brush them in the mornings. It can be starting your day with a glass of water versus a cup of coffee. It's really the practice of making and keeping that commitment, because now not only are you on your way toward a new habit, because that's what a new habit is, new choices made over time, you're doing something psychologically much more important, in my opinion, which is you're empowering yourself to keep creating change even when that resistance is there.
Well, I think it's important to highlight, as we talk about resistance, that this is something you're going to inevitably face when you decide to do the work. The work isn't going to be painless. It's not going to be easy. This is, like you mentioned before, our subconscious wants to, continue on the path that it's used to. There's going to be discomfort. So knowing that going into it, I think, can be really helpful for people.
Yes. Yes. And so knowing that, because I think when a lot of us, I've heard, I've even done this to myself, a lot of us will take that resistance to mean something. Our brains sneakily love to assign meaning to everything that happens. And again, this is another process that usually happens outside of our awareness. And the number one meaning that most of us assign to this resistance is that it's kind of like some SOS telling me that this isn't right for me, this isn't the path for me. We misinterpret it a lot of times as this voice of resistance as our intuition. Like it's yelling for me not to do this. And I have myself taken, because if I'm being fully honest, I'm over time learning how to expand my ability to tolerate any discomfort. The first time I feel uncomfortable in my mind or in my body for a very long time, I jump ship. I don't like to do things that make me physically or me mentally uncomfortable, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I've learned how to stay away from those things. And I've learned how to do the things that I find that are easier for me to do. And practicing that for so long, for me, it was like the first time resistance came, oh, I took that as the meaning to be, well, this is my intuition telling me that just as I suspected, this very uncomfortable thing isn't meant for me. So I offer this so that people expect it, and that if that is a meaning that you're assigning to it, you can question that meaning.
Well, let's stick on that intuition piece a little bit further and talk about how do we really hone in and know when this is true intuition that's talking to us?
Yes, I love this question, and I get this often. So this is kind of a meet your intuition by determining what it's not process in a lot of ways. So some things I can tell your intuition aren't before I kind of shift into kind of how it speaks, where it comes from. Anything that's kind of reiterative, the endless stories, and I say this because we all, I think, have the narratives, the stories, the meanings that our mind loves to revisit. Anything that's kind of very repetitive in life, in your mind, typically isn't a voice of your intuition. I would go as far to say even that when we're hearing this voice of our intuition, it really doesn't sound, and again, I'm using all of this language, I think, because it's mainly how we make sense of the world, like a voice, a thought in your head. It more comes in my experience and what I've heard from people in a feeling, in a ping, in an energy that we can sense, whether it's kind of like coming through our body where we feel a tingle or a tension and we feel like we're, getting nervous about something. Or some of us can locate it. Oh, I feel it in my heart. I feel it in my gut. I feel it in my chest. And again, this is kind of really highlights the body again and its role as our sensory, as our guidance post. So if you're constantly paying attention to the thoughts in your mind, and you said something earlier that is a really important extension of this conversation about consciousness, which is a lot of us assign our whole being to the voices in our head. And what I mean when I say that is we think that's who we are. The constant narration that's going through most of your heads throughout the day, if you're paying attention, we assign that to be like the voice of us. And again, the more you pay attention to and witness that voice, you'll start to hear how, like I'm sharing, it's very repetitive. You tell yourself the same story about yourself, about your relationships, about the world around you. And again, that's not necessarily the voice of your intuition. So the first way to know the difference is to be just becoming conscious of yourself, becoming conscious of those repetitive voices, and then becoming conscious of where is your attention. And the more attention you're putting in your body, the more you're going to be able then to tune into what your intuition feels like or sounds like or when it comes. And the most consistent example that most of us have lived is when you have those moments where, something's telling you to move this glass back off this table, right? Just something. You can't describe what it was. It wasn't necessarily a voice. It was kind of this idea that I should move this glass away. And before I know it, within 10 minutes, right, my cat comes by and knocks that glass right over. Those are the moments where, or like a knowing, don't put your keys there, yet you put your keys there and then you forgot where your keys are. And so the more we can just become conscious of when those moments are naturally happening, this idea to ping a friend and your friend pings you, right? All of that can be described. And I'm using those because those I think are more common examples of when intuition is already speaking to those of you out there listening. And what most of us do is, like I described it, we override it. We've heard it and we rationalize or we talk ourselves out of listening to it. So that would be another place to start too. Begin to pay attention when you get odd notions, odd ideas. Where do they come from? What are they telling you? And then maybe do your own testing. See what happens if you listen to it and see what happens if you don't.
Yeah, that makes sense. Testing it out. And I was going to add to that too, starting out small and seeing how some of these things pan out, building confidence in your intuition if this is new to you. And then over time, you can ramp that up.
Yes, absolutely. And again, with all things, start small because it's that confidence piece that most of us are lacking because we haven't ever asked ourselves if you're like me, or we haven't ever listened to our intuition. I know for as long as I can remember, I would have never called it my intuition. I didn't know what it was. But I've had those pings, those signals with me through life. One of them even was sending me into the direction of becoming a psychologist. When I'm always asked, why psychology? I don't really have an answer except that inner knowing. I just kind of knew that's what I was en route to do. I would have never called it intuition. And more often than not, what I did, except in the psychology cases, I overrode it. I didn't follow it for whatever reason. And so most of us have those moments, but like I said, don't listen to it, don't trust it. And then, so yes, the goal is to begin to have a more consistent practice of not only listening, but like you're saying, using small tests along the way.
Coming back to that resistance piece, we talked about a couple things there that are going to be really helpful for people. One being start small. And then the other is, I mentioned the fact that knowing there's going to be discomfort going through the process of doing the work. Any other strategies for people other than starting small and knowing there's going to be that discomfort that they can take along with them when that resistance comes up, so they can be more likely to push through and to have a breakthrough?
I think the next place, another foundational tool that I want to mention here, again, it is when we're talking about the body, the most important part, or the system that I'm mainly referencing that we'll go into a little bit here, is our nervous system. And our nervous system, again, to really simplify it, is our brain, our spinal cord, and how all of that communicates with pretty much every organ and cell in our body. It really is how it initiates and maintains our nervous system. That is every function that we need daily, outside of our awareness, the fact that our heart is beating and we're breathing without needing to remind ourselves to do that, to the things that we're more consciously doing, our ability to communicate and to connect with other people. And our nervous system is so integral that, in my opinion, like I was sharing, it becomes a foundational place to tune into, because what most of us are the bodies that most of us are living in as adults, are living in with a dysregulated nervous system. So our nervous system, one of its main functions outside of keeping our whole body running and all of its systems, is to help us deal with stress. From little stresses that most of us meet daily to big, overwhelming moments of emotion or stress in our life. And ideally, again, really to simplify it, our nervous system allows us to shift into action to deal with the stress and then to come back into its ideal state of parasympathetic, or rest and digest, so that my body can be rested and all my systems can go back to normal. My digestion, my breathing, once the threat is gone away. Most of us, however, because we didn't have attuned caregivers, we didn't grow up in safe environments, our nervous system never actually learned how to deal with stress in a resilient way. That's simply what resilience is: the ability to become stressed and then to become unstressed, if we're really simplifying things. As most of us tune into our adult bodies, what we find is that our nervous system is completely dysregulated. We're always stressed out. We're always anxious. We're waiting for the next shoe to drop. It always feels like our heartbeat is in our chest, or our hands are sweaty. Maybe we're in a state of shutdown. I know I lived for decades so disconnected from my body, barely able to feel my breathing, in a state of nervous system shutdown or dissociation. And that's so foundationally important to know, because like I was sharing, our nervous system plays every role, from how is my body experiencing this moment to how can I connect with another human being. And when we feel like we're under threat, we can't connect with ourselves and we can't connect with the world around us. So when we're tuning in, learning how to, through your breath, that's going to be the number one place to go, because our breathing actually changes when our body is stressed. Like I described earlier, when it becomes quick and from our chest, we're usually in a state of fight or flight. We're waiting for a stress or a threat. We think it's present. When we're breathing really calmly and evenly from our belly, we can rest assured or give a guess that our body is feeling safe and feeling calm in that moment. So a quick test, and you can even add this on. I love habit stacking, or this concept of once we learn how to do one small new thing in our day, we can build on that. So once you say, have the consciousness check in as part of your consistent day, now when that alarm goes off, check in with your breath. Put a hand on your chest and a hand on your belly, and maybe just observe where you're breathing from. Can you tell how stressed your body is? And if you start to feel that quickened breath, or you can barely feel your chest, audibly, or you can barely feel your hand moving, learning how to breathe calmly, deeply, slowly from your belly will actually help you not only regulate your body, but regulate your mind. And that's going to be incredibly important as we're tuning into the uncomfortable thoughts, the uncomfortable feelings, rebuilding that resilience, the ability to be present to something that is uncomfortable in our body and help our body to calm down is going to be foundational.
While we're talking about the nervous system piece and, it being out of whack and on overdrive, let's bring the vagus nerve in and talk about that and get into the nuances of how that fits into all this.
The vagus nerve is so incredibly important, and it's shocking actually that it has not been a part of a conversation as consistently as I think it needs to until more recently than not. So our vagus nerve is the main nerve in our body, again, connecting our brain with all of our major organs. And it's actually the nerve that helps us. And again, I'm really going to simplify all of this. It helps us downshift from that stressed out state to that calm state. And the more frequently our body is able to do that, the more it's referred to as we have good or high vagal tone, meaning our body can deal with stress and can calm itself down. When we aren't practiced in that, when we didn't have a caregiver help us come from a stressed event, like we're crying, we're hungry as a child, we're overwhelmed, come back into calm, when that doesn't happen, it's referred to as we have low vagal tone, or our vagal tone isn't good, which simply just means, and again, I'm simplifying all this, our body remains stressed out. It can't come back to calm on its own. And so most of us as adults, we don't have the vagal tone that allows us to have the emotional resilience, because we actually get stuck in fight or flight, or we get stuck in shutdown mode. However, the good thing to know, like all conversations we have when we're talking about the mind and body, we can create change. We now know that not only are we neuroplastic in terms of creating all those new neural pathways that we were talking about in terms of going from unconscious to conscious, we actually now know that we can tone our vagus nerve. We can teach our body how to calm down after it becomes stressed. And this is, again, where this becomes the work in and of itself, an embodiment practice. And what I mean when I say that is we need to go out and practice with our bodies going from a stressed moment to a calm moment. So when I feel my heart rate beginning to elevate and my chest, my breath beginning to quicken, using those calm, even deep belly breaths to calm my body down is one of those moments of embodying the practice. And I'm highlighting this here because a lot of these are concept, or everything we're talking about is a concept. Oh, calm my body. Right. My body's stressed. Yes, I have all of these symptoms, so I need to calm my body down. That's an idea. That just remains an idea until we teach our body how to do that. And that's what this work of healing requires, unfortunately, because our body will do what it knows how to do. It will continue to live in those very habited ways, and all of this will remain an idea, a concept. And this is why for so long, myself and all of my clients were stuck, because we had all of these ideas. We even had a game plan of action, of what to do differently the next time this thing happens. Yet again, it's the practice of doing differently with the resistance that will live in my mind and my body that becomes challenging. So putting these practices into practice is so incredibly important. And we can build the foundation by adding on to that consciousness check-in, a breath practice. Get really intimately aware of how your body breathes. Come to know when your body's stressed, and come to use these tools, particularly breath work, to help your body become calm when you need to.
I want to highlight, I'm sure people are getting a taste for the fact that this isn't going to be a hack, an overnight fix, something that happens, at the snap of the fingers. This, a lot of this stuff is built up over a lifetime and goes all the way back to childhood. And this work, again, to highlight, is going to have some discomfort it's also going to take time. So for people that want to get in and do this work and have their profound shifts, they need to be ready to dedicate themselves over a period of time.
Yes, it takes time. And there are so many, I think kind of touch points along the way. Because while we're having all this conversation about it's difficult and, becoming conscious, has its challenges, it also becomes the most empowering foundation that you can create for yourself. Because that's one of the first things I'll hear is how powerless people, myself included, have felt living in these cycles of reactivity and maybe carrying a lifetime of shame, of feeling badly about ourselves because we can't seem to make new choices. And one of the first things I'll start to hear from people is that first shift into, oh gosh, I see a ton of habits and patterns that don't serve me. And yet I feel a little more empowered to get there, to create change when I get there, because I'm starting to see how powerful this presence can be. And that is, I think, the hope that we gain along the way is when I become present, that's the first thing I begin to feel is I'm now shifting into the driver's seat in a way that most people haven't felt for a lifetime. And when we're living reactively and you feel powerless, I think as a human, that's an incredibly uncomfortable place to be, because that's where we start to now entertain all of these ideas of shame, all of these ideas of unworthiness as the reason for why we can't get the results that we want. And I can assure everyone listening that while there might be habits and patterns that aren't serving you in your life, they are no reflection of who you are on the inside. That again, all of that likely has been an adaptation, has become the best way that your whole system, your organism, has found to survive in all of the different environments and experiences it's lived thus far. Now, however, becoming conscious puts you into the car. And again, that can be an empowering beginning shift that while you do see a road ahead of you to keep showing up to make new choices, you are now factoring into the conversation.
And because this is so radically different from the way a lot of people have been living their whole lives, you mentioned empowerment in that sense that people will come to you with and feel like they're gaining some control over their life. What are some other signs early on when people might still be doubting the process that, things are starting to shift and this is working?
I think there's so many different signs. And I want to start first with kind of the individual signs. And I'm doing this intentionally because we all change or we all go on this type of journey for many different reasons. A very common one is I want my relationship to be different. I want my family to feel different. I want things outside of me to also change. And I like to remind us all, especially if you've listened thus far to this podcast up until this point, we've talked a lot about all of the different choices you, individual who wants to change, has to make every day, from becoming conscious to tuning into your body to determining what your signals your body is sending you in terms of your own guidance. It's a lot of, to put it simply, work. And I'm saying this because while, yes, our external world as a byproduct of us changing absolutely changes, our relationships will begin to feel different. We'll experience others differently. Our families might shift and change, and habits and patterns that maybe have been passed for generations might begin to break up a bit. However, if we're looking to change the outside world first, or we need someone else to do something differently before we can, then we're going to get ourselves backlocked into a cycle of waiting, and even more problematically of resentment, of waiting for someone else to do something different before I can have a different experience. So as we're looking for the shifts and the changes, begin to look within, right? How are you feeling differently? So as you're honoring yourself now for keeping these small daily promises every day, with emphasis on the smallness, begin to look for yourself. How do you feel? What things are starting to shift and change? Are you more easily ready to connect, or able, I should say, to connect with your body when that alarm goes off at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. for you, right? Are you learning how to tune in to your body when you're eating, maybe. Begin to look for those shifts and their changes, because I assure you they'll be there, and they'll be different for each of you depending on kind of what area you're working on. But outside of empowerment, like I said, there's so many different things that people will start to say, to see differently. Wow, I'm noticing, first and foremost, the first thing we notice is how disconnected I am. And that's, I think, the first major shift is, oh my gosh, I was so disconnected. And now gradually, I'm beginning to learn how to connect with myself. I'm beginning to learn now that I'm paying maybe more attention to, say, my sleep times. I'm beginning to now feel the difference that that's making. I wake up, I feel more refreshed. And again, all of this depends on whatever it is that you're keeping committed to. But again, I want to highlight here, we all want the world outside of us to change. That happens when we begin to change, when we are more easily ready or able to express our needs, to identify our needs, to show up in service of what we need in a given moment. And then the world around us changes.
You said something there that got me thinking about the relationships, our close relationships with family, friends, our partner, as we begin to do this work and we begin to change from the inside out, and we're no longer, appearing from the outside in as we used to. And obviously there's going to be some of that is just part of the process, and people are going to have to learn to accept that, we're doing this for a positive change in ourselves and for everybody in our environment. But how do we go about making that as easy of a transition? Or is it something we even need to worry about? How do we go about, giving people a heads up or making it easier on the people that are closest to us as we begin to transition?
Yeah, and while like I'm here suggesting to keep focus on self, the reality is as we change, there will be some impact around us. And I think the first suggestion I want to offer here is communication. Right? Anyone out there who, is intending to begin a journey or is on their own journey, who is planning to stay committed to whatever small daily promise it is, communication goes a long way. And I share this for all of us out there who have the idea that those in our lives are mind readers. They should just know. Can't they just tell I'm doing things different? And a little communication goes a long way, giving your loved ones a heads up that your morning will start maybe 20 minutes earlier beginning tomorrow, or that you're going to stay committed to, not coming out of your bedroom until you've done your 5 deep belly breaths like we were just talking about, right? So your morning will start maybe 10 minutes later to your partner. You'll arrive to the breakfast table later, and that will then at least alert people that you're going to be doing something differently. Now, what happens beyond that, once you've kept that commitment to yourself, the reality is just like our autopilot, our subconscious loves that familiar, so do all of the relationships around us. We've become very patterned. For a lot of us, that means we inhabit or we embody or we play the same roles. We are the helper, we are the caretaker in all of our relationships. So what does that mean? People have come to rely on our care, our help. They've come to, kind of assume the receiving end of whatever role, however it is that we typically have shown up to them. So what the first thing that happens is, so if I'm now setting a daily commitment to care for myself, that means I might be a little less available to someone who's been expecting or receiving care from me for a very long time. So now, of course, they might meet the impact of it. And here's where, again, the limit of our responsibility lie, meaning we can't actually control the world around us, period. The end. While we like to think we can, and we can maybe directly communicate our intention and keep our promise to ourselves come tomorrow morning, we can't control what the people around us or how they will react once it happens. And that's what I was sharing. When we are changing and not being as available or using time that once went to someone else to do something for ourselves, there will be impact made there. So once we've communicated our intention, We can maybe even communicate our why. Sometimes that will go a long way, telling a loved one why you're showing up differently for yourself, which might involve them even. I want to care for myself in a different way so that I could be more caring to you and to our relationship. That will sometimes help that person understand. So when they do experience you differently, they can remind themselves of why you're doing the different thing. And it also might not. They might still have a reaction. And here's again where, right, we can only assume responsibility for what we're responsible for. Of course, we can support someone, we can hold space, we can understand why their expectation has now been violated. Though, again, this is where it's really important for us to stay committed to ourselves and our why.
And another piece from the book that kind of ties into all this is setting boundaries. Part of doing the work is setting boundaries. And obviously, when we start to set boundaries, we start to say no if we're somebody who's been a people pleaser, somebody who's just been there to always say yes to family and friends. That might rub people the wrong way as well. So let's talk about setting healthy boundaries. And again, what can we do to help support the people around us, if that's even part of the equation here, to make that transition more seamless?
Absolutely. So boundaries, just so we're all clear on what we're talking about here, really simply, it's a limit. It might be a physical boundary, a limit of how much space I physically need to feel comfortable, how much physical contact I might feel comfortable having or not having with different, degrees of loved ones or physical connections in my life. It might mean a separation between emotions, really honoring, and this is a tough reality, I think, for a lot of us, especially those of us who grew up without boundaries in our childhood home, honoring the reality that people react differently emotionally to different events. Two people can live one experience and come away from it feeling two separately different ways. So boundaries are really just limits or points of separation where I'm able to be uniquely who I am and safely hold space for you, whoever you might be, to be uniquely who you are in whatever relationship we're in together. And so for me, just using myself as an example, coming to the realization that I never factored myself in. There was no Nicole really in my relationships because I never asked myself or I never honored the needs that I knew I was having if I knew them, because I always thought I was showing up in service of someone else. I wanted to be a good friend. I wanted to be someone who was caring. And I had all of these meanings associated with showing up in this selfless way for people. So boundaries were a really big part of my journey, which meant learning first where my limits are, right? How and when and why do I even want to be available to someone else? How does my body need to feel? For me, rest it. It's very hard for me to show up to do anything, work or personal, interpersonal, when my body doesn't have the resources it needs. And so that meant making sure that I had space in my life to take care of myself, which meant no calls in the middle of the night, making sure I was protecting my sleeping hours, maybe not being as fully available to some loved ones who might have had crises at all times of the day. And that meant putting up boundaries or saying no's along the way. So that is for each of us to determine what our boundaries need to be. A lot of us, like I said, we were not taught having those points of separation in a home early on. And it's really exploring what makes you feel the safest, the most comfortable. How do you need to, how much space do you need in a relationship physically, emotionally? To be in your full self-expression? And can you begin to limit yourself, say no, give yourself more time, give yourself maybe even time, let's bring this conversation full circle, to begin to explore yourself. A lot of you out there listening might be like, oh, geez, I'm really disconnected. I'm like you, Nicole. I have no idea what I want or I need. Oh, this idea of purpose and passion you guys brushed over earlier, can't answer that. So what your boundaries might be space boundaries, just not keeping yourself busy or focused on someone else throughout your day, just building in a couple moments to turn inward and then obviously expanding that. And that's a boundary too, limiting where we're putting our time, our attention, and our emotions. And I think that's the number one boundary most of us need because so many of us are. And it doesn't mean that we don't have families, we don't have obligations. We need to fit it all in. but so many of us aren't even giving ourselves even a portion of our equation in any given day.
Something you've touched on a few times, and I think it's important we go back and get into the nuances of, is this relation between parent and child and how that goes on to influence the behavior of that child as they grow up and as they become an adult. So let's talk about that influence. And then is it important for us to go back and figure out the roots and some of these influences that we had or expectations, these interactions with our parents? Is it important to go back and figure that out to do the work to move forward?
So we'll start with the first part of that question. Our relationships, our earliest relationships with whatever caregiver, parent figure, we all grew up, I think, with different constellations of adults around us. However, I think the universal similarity between all of us is there was someone who had to show up at least some of the time, because as a human infant, we actually can't survive without a caregiver of sorts. And now this doesn't mean that we had a caregiver who was consistently attentive to our body's physical needs, showing up when it was hungry, helping us get to sleep when we were upset, changing us. Doesn't mean that we had someone who was consistently available to help us explore our emotions or the different things we feel as humans and help us go from unsafe or threat back to safe, like we were talking about with our nervous system, helping our nervous system again to develop flexibly and emotional resilience and carrying that into adulthood. However, we all had someone. And this is why I'm highlighting that. Because of our adaptive nature and because of our dependent nature, we needed that person to survive. Both of those go hand in hand, meaning our survival is the basis need we have as humans. We want to continue our organism into life. So this is where the adaptation comes in. We'll figure out how to fit in whatever environment we're born into. However consistent or inconsistent those caregivers around us are, we'll find a way to keep them coming back to the best of our ability to meet whatever need they're consistently or inconsistently meeting to sustain our life. And this is where we begin to wear those masks, play those roles. If you had a parent who didn't prefer when you cried or told you it was weak, you would cry a little less. Because the more connected you are to that person, the more likely your survival. And just like any relationship, we begin to fit in. So whatever those primary caregivers were, you modified yourself to keep that bond alive. And then that became the model, to keep it really simple, for how you relate in relationships. So now you become school age and you go off and you start to interact with peers. And before long, you're doing the same things in your relationships because in some deep way, that's what you've learned a relationship is. In a relationship, it's not safe to show your feelings. Some of us might have learned that. Or in a relationship, you have an explosive, person with big feelings. And so the best thing you could do is be so attuned to them and make sure that they're okay, that you then, as a result, are okay. And this is where we develop the person who's hypervigilant, goes into that fawn state. I just take care of everyone around me because that ultimately keeps me safe. So that becomes really the blueprint. And that's why so many of us, we have relationship patterns that don't serve us. We might even have our friends in the rafters saying, oh my gosh, you're picking this partner again. Don't you know where this ends up? According to, again, our subconscious mind, that's our familiar space. That's how we define love. That's how we define relationships. That's the only way I'm familiar to myself. I only know how to be a caretaker to someone else. So that really becomes the model that we repeat then over time, the best way, the best ability we had to get our needs met. However, what most of us find out into adulthood is we're feeling unfulfilled. We aren't actually factoring our needs met, or the way we're attempting to get our needs met aren't actually translating into having our needs met into adulthood.
And as somebody who has two young kids, reading this part of your book and having this part of the conversation, it can seem like a lot of pressure for a parent to make sure and get that right, especially in the earlier years when, they're forming that bond, that relationship with the parents. Talk about somebody who is listening or watching right now and they're tuned into this and they want to make sure they're helping their child facilitate development to the best of their ability during that time. How do they go about doing that?
Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback this off a question you had asked me in the last one that I did not answer, and that was, how do you need to remember? Do you need to go back to these early dynamics? And the answer here is no, because likely if you begin to look at yourself in your relationships now, you'll see that same patterning. Watch, witness, consciously view yourself. How are you showing up now? And that will likely give you an indication of the same things that you'd brought from childhood along with you. And the reason why I'm using that as our bouncing board to answer this question is because it is a lot of pressure. And the other side of that pressure is, again, our crazy ability to change and to show a child. So maybe you're a parent and you're listening and your kid is in adolescence already. And so, you've already had those years, right, that you were modeling whatever habits and patterns. And now maybe you're on your own healing journey and you're going to start to model something different. The brain, the body, everyone's ability to change continues throughout life. So showing your child a new way of being by modifying, by explaining, by showing up differently in relationship with them will actually help them to embrace change, that change is okay. So now they get to experience a parent who's changing throughout their life. They get to see and have that. And again, now they get to participate in a relationship, and that's going to be the greater teacher than you telling them what to do, you actually being different in relationship with them. And this is for those of you out there who have teenage or, college age or adult age children. Change can happen at any age. And the process of going through change with a caregiver, with a parent, can be so incredibly impactful. There's so many members of the community who are changing the way they're parenting because first, they're changing the way they're showing up for themselves, and their children are viewing that. And then, like we were sharing earlier, their children will begin to experience each of you now differently. So to relieve some of that pressure is that children are always watching, and you be showing them a different way of being wherever you are in their life, and reminding you that the showing is really the important part of it, not just the instructing them to do different. The impact can be, and I've had so many even adult children with their, adult aged parent, late in life now, talking about the process of change that they're both going through well into their adult years, even in terms of their parent-child dynamic.
And I think remembering the fact that none of us are perfect also can take a lot of that pressure off.
100%. And this is the compassionate reminder that many of us pick up on our own healing journey. Because what have we mainly been talking about here, right? Habits and patterns that have been passed on. So as you get really clear, oh, geez, I'm carrying all of these habits and patterns in my subconscious mind from my own childhood. By extension, what many of us then do is we then say, oh, gosh, that means that my mom, my dad, the grandmother who raised me, whatever it was, your aunt, whoever it was that you spent time with, that was teaching you and modeling all of this for you as a child, oh gosh, they too had a childhood where they were modeled, right? So this is where we can begin to pull back and compassionately hold space for all of humanity, meaning that we are all humans raised by imperfect humans doing the best that they can, that were impacted from the generations right before them. And especially for those of us who have an idea of, the generational or the cultural or the religious or, whatever it is, kind of factors that influenced our past generations, can have maybe a more clear idea of why you saw the habits and patterns that you did in your own parents.
And is this where the wounded inner child piece fits in, when the parent is using less than ideal means to instill those habits and patterns?
Yeah, so we all have that space of us, even, those of us who are in our adult years, we feel like we're out of childhood in a very real way. However, that space within us still lives in our subconscious mind. And what that means for many of us is, what lives in there, I should say, is all of that, kind of the old reactivity, the old ways I've learned how to deal with my emotions, all of that, the things that I maybe learned emotionally weren't safe for me to express. All of that still lives in beliefs, in habits, in patterns in my inner child. So that might translate to, just to continue with this example, if in childhood sadness was weak, right? Now I have that belief. My inner child believes that sadness is weak. And that's the meaning it will assign. So chances are into adulthood, I probably am an adult who's always happy. Nothing's ever wrong. I might not tell you, right, if something's wrong, because that inner child, that wounded inner child who was shamed when they were sad or they expressed sadness is still alive and it has that memory. So as opposed to risking showing sadness and being shamed again, I just stop showing my sadness. And again, all of this lives in the habits and patterns of our subconscious mind. So even though we're in an adult age, this is why I share kind of a lot of it looks emotionally immature. When we're yelling, when we're screaming, when our emotions are out of control, a lot of times it's because we're relying on the things that the only tools we had access to in childhood, yelling, screaming, icing someone, walking out with my toys and not speaking. We kind of do that same thing into adulthood, just in an adult body. And again, because that's that remnant of that inner child. Because as a child, the only thing I could do, right, was storm off into my room when I was upset or yell and scream at my brother when I was upset. That's the only resource I had. I haven't learned how to do anything new or more mature with my anger.
And using that inner child example of the sadness and somebody who, later on in life doesn't want to show that aspect of themselves because of childhood, knowing, what we're discussing here and being aware, how much of an impact can we have on that later in life? Is that always going to be kind of a crutch that we get pulled back to, or can we do the work and really uproot that?
We can, like I was sharing earlier in terms of everything that we're talking about here, we can rewire. So that doesn't mean that these reactions go away. These stories might still be present. And when I'm talking about rewiring, and I've used this concept earlier when I used holding space, it means expanding into that conscious state where in real time, right, I can maybe be present to my inner child wanting to kick, to scream, to yell, though I can still have access to choice in that point that we were talking about earlier. It doesn't go away entirely. I might still tell myself the same narratives. So one of my inner childs is I always like to remind myself how I'm not considered in life. My subconscious will still offer that meaning. Oh, lunch wasn't made for me when I'm off this podcast. It's because I wasn't considered. So that might still be offered because it's so practiced that my subconscious knows that's the meaning that typically I assigned in the past. I might be able to offer myself a new option in that moment. So if I do feel like I wasn't considered, my partners didn't make me lunch, I might feel sad, I might feel mad. I might see that as a possibility now in time. However, I might also remind myself that that's not what it was at all. They didn't know what time I was getting off. So now I've expanded, like I was sharing, into that space. So our inner child doesn't fully go away, though I give myself access to new choices, to a new thing to do, maybe with that feeling that's happening.
Earlier, when you talked about your journey into becoming a psychologist, you said when you look back, it's hard for you to really figure out what was the catalyst to lead into that. But what I'm curious about, and this comes back to your story, let's talk about why you went from being a quote unquote, classical psychologist to what you are today, taking this more holistic approach. So let's go to your story and get into the nuances of what led you to become this way.
Absolutely. So I took pretty much every psychology class that I could have taken through high school, and then I did my undergraduate in psychology, and then went into a graduate program and really versed myself in learning all different ways to work with people. In the field, they're called modalities. So outside of the gold standard, as it's known, cognitive behavioral therapy that most schools teach, there's, psychodynamic and psychoanalytic with the couch. And so I learned all of these different tools, for lack of a better word. And once I got to the place where I was able to obtain a license, I obtained a license in Philadelphia, and I opened up a practice using what I would call kind of a more integrated approach. I used a little bit of cognitive behavioral. I had picked up mindfulness as a concept along the way. I knew this idea was important. So I did a little bit of mindfulness-based work. I did a lot of work with couples. So I would do some interpersonal communication. I kind of had this grab bag of tricks. And what I learned very quickly, only a couple years into having a private practice that filled up with clients very successfully, very quickly, I began to feel very disempowered because what I would see and hear, not only in my own personal life, having been in multiple types of different treatment myself, an individual and group, I laid on a couch, I did psychoanalytic, I was continuing to struggle for me with anxiety, with feeling disconnected in my relationships, with feeling generally just not fulfilled in life. And by this point, I checked every box that I thought was going to make me happy. I had a partner, I had a practice, I was living in a city that I wanted to live in. And I would now have clients that I was developing relationships with week after week that continued to also feel stuck. Like this whole grab bag of tricks we could plan until we're blue in the face for this new thing that's going to happen next time a partner fight happens with this client. And yet week after week, I would come back into session with the same reports. Oh my gosh, I'm stuck. I forgot to do this new thing. I can't make a new habit. Nothing's working. And so for me, I was first confused. I was starting to feel really disempowered. Like I said, not only as a human who was continuing to struggle on my own side of things, but as a clinician, I felt like the work that I was doing wasn't helping people get better. And I got curious after I started to have some physical things happening in my own life. I started to faint pretty out of nowhere. I never had that happen to me in my life before. So I first got a little scared, and that, as I think it does with a lot of us, it sent me online. And I'm very grateful for my fainting episodes, because when I was beginning to research all of the different reasons why someone might start to faint, and many of them were very scary reasons, I actually happened upon something we were talking about earlier, which is the vagus nerve. And then that opened a door into the concept, or the science, I should say, of epigenetics, and this idea that we're not genetically predetermined in our life at all. And up until that point, I was actually taught and lived quite the opposite. I believe that our genes were it. This is why I thought everything I was seeing in my families made sense. I came from anxious parents, so of course I'm anxious, and all of this patterning made sense, that it was because genetically that's what, I had given to me at birth. So for me, I got really curious now. So now I'm learning this new science that's saying, yeah, your genes are part of the story. Yet every day you're making choices and you're living in an environment, and that environment is affecting the expression of certain genes. That was mind blowing. So I dove down a rabbit hole learning all about this version of the body and our interaction between our body and our environment. And here's where my door opened to stress and all of these byproducts of stress and our vagus nerve and dysregulation. And for me, it turned my life upside down because I was hearing things that I hadn't heard before. And I was beginning to see a pathway out. First, questioning what I thought was just deep rooted. For me, anxiety, I thought I was just going to have it forever in my life. I was sure by this point the physical symptoms I was suffering, like fainting, were a result of something genetic going on with me that was only a matter of time before I had that disease or diagnosis. And now I was beginning to question all of that. And I was beginning to wonder if there was something else at the root that was causing all of the symptoms that I've been experiencing, including anxiety. So for me, and this didn't happen overnight, there was a lot of deep-rooted beliefs in myself that I like to joke and say were kind of rolling their eyes at me. And they're like, yeah, Nicole, okay, you're reading all of these fabulous, incredible, transformative stories of humans creating change and overcoming, anxiety and all of this deep-rooted, long-standing stuff. It's not going to be you, though. You are limited for all of these other reasons, but very gradually, as I think many times is the case, I started my own journey, which first began with consciousness, me seeing how disconnected I was from my body to even know how to take care of my body, and then beginning to learn how to take care of my body. And of course, that then introduced me to the body, to working holistically. And before long, I started to become so empowered. I started to become so connected that I started to really understand that this was, in my opinion, the missing link, the body in and of itself, that's communicating with the mind. And then I began to really think about how to structure this sort of healing journey, and really came to the awareness that I wanted to hit that pivot in my practice, that I didn't want to do all of these new ways of use all these new tools on my own without sharing them with my clients. So then very gradually, I started to shift the way that I was working with clients in the room and started to talk more about the body. And then, of course, began to experiment with using online and social media to begin to share some of these messages.
Let's talk about the belief piece. You mentioned that there quickly. Beliefs are thoughts that we're having over and over again. They become ingrained. How does somebody go about working through those and reversing those? Say it's somebody feeling like I'm not enough, or I'm ugly, or whatever it is. We can use a million different examples, but we all have these different beliefs that we've built up over a lifetime. How do we go about assessing what those are and then go about reworking them to something that's going to be more helpful?
So a belief, the most simplest way I like to define what a belief is, and it's just like you shared it, a practiced thought that was very much grounded in our past experiences, in a lived experience. Something happened. That's the meaning that was assigned for us, or our mind assigned to whatever event it was. So I'm not worthy is a very, very common one. If in childhood there was an aspect of ourself, again, I show sadness and that's not welcomed here. Mom doesn't receive me, well, or isn't interested in interacting with me when I'm showing this aspect of myself. So before long, if that happens consistently enough, we might entertain mom leaving the room, mom shutting me down, mom saying, don't do that, might be interpreted as me not being worthy enough in that expression to mom. So I do like to highlight that beliefs come absolutely from some very real place, from a very real experience, from very real feelings that once happened. However, here's where they get tricky and where they get kind of installed in us like a software program. The more that becomes a belief that's confirmed in our environment, because our mind doesn't like not knowing. It does like to assign a meaning. It likes to make sense of what's happening around us. So it will use our beliefs as filters. We simply, as a human, there's just way too much happening in even any given second of our life to take in everything. So I'm sitting in a big room right now. There's lights on me. There's stuff happening outside of the room. If I were to pay attention to everything that I could be paying attention to in this moment, I would literally have smoke coming out of my ears. So unconsciously, our brain does a service for us. It determines, or it utilizes an algorithm of a sort, our beliefs being one of the factors. It needs to decide what's relevant for me in this moment. So what is relevant for me in this moment is where my attention goes, and everything else it deletes out because it's saying, oh, this is not necessary in this time. So our beliefs become one of those filters. So if you have this idea that I'm not worthy, we will then continue to carry this I'm not worthy filter through life. And because we love to be not only certain, we love to be right, we will kind of become a self-confirming machine where the text that goes unresponded to, right? Or the lunch that's not made for me. I'm walking around with this I'm not worthy filter. So, that confirmed it, because if I was worthy, they would have responded to my text. If I was worthy, I'd have lunch on a plate waiting for me. So before long, we are now confirming with our environment, without even checking in to see if that's the objective reality or not, these deep-rooted beliefs. So those of us that feel I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I'm not pretty, have a lifetime of confirmation. And that's why it's so hard. And like I was saying, I was subconsciously, my beliefs were rolling its eyes at me saying, oh, these are great new beliefs, but not for us. Because we've become so confirmed in our beliefs, because our mind does that for us, that it's hard to even allow in any evidence of the contrary. So to work with our beliefs is really the process of all of everything we've been talking about. First step of it is to become conscious to them. Become conscious to the thoughts that are going through your head throughout the day. Become aware of what themes. You'll start to see the themes that run through your thoughts. They'll hang together in patterns. You can probably, guess that those are related. The thoughts you think on repeat are related to some of those deep core beliefs that you have about yourself. So once we're conscious to how we are filtering the world, now we again give ourselves the opportunity to test them, to try them on for size, to maybe see like I was sharing earlier. Oh, okay, here's my I'm not considered belief, or I'm not worthy. My lunch isn't made for me. That's one option. In that space now, I can maybe give myself a new thought to practice. I can rewire that belief. That's essentially what that means, is begin to practice thinking a new thought. Listeners probably have heard of affirmations or mantras. For a lot of us, that's the beginning of a new belief, writing what you would prefer to think about yourself. So from I'm not worthy to I am worthy. Put that on Post-it notes all around your space and begin to recite, that's what an affirmation is, that new thought. And the more you consistently practice that new thought, the more over time that filter will expand. It won't be so quick to just affirm how not worthy you are, because you've began to practice affirming how worthy you are. And over time, that filter will expand and will help you to confirm that in your life.
I can see how that would take a long time to get that inertia going the other way with having everything working against you. A lifetime of thinking that, plus having that bias in your environment to pull in facts to confirm that as you're going through your days.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
to get really practical then, just to highlight what you said there, we can write down all our beliefs using our repetitive thoughts as a system to try and figure out what those are. And then beside them, we want to write down what the new belief is, post those around the house, and then use
Yes.
repetition over time to ingrain the new beliefs. And then I can see how, say, I am beautiful the way I am instead of I am ugly. Over time, you're going to start to see in your environment, maybe when you look in the mirror in the morning or whatever it is, little tidbits, and gain that inertia the other way and start working back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the first stage of it too, when with the witness, begin to practice spending less time. You can't stop that your subconscious is going to say, oh, you are not beautiful. You are not worthy. For me, I am not considered. My subconscious might be at the ready, will be at the ready with that. I have a choice though on whether or not I hook into it, whether or not I then continue to repeat. I'm not considered. They're not considering me. Now I storm around my kitchen repeating how not considered I am. So a lot of us, and I share that because we could be blue in the face saying all these new affirmations in front of our, in front of our Post-it note, and then continue about our day repeating the old beliefs. So it's a two-step of seeing them and not then giving into them, because your subconscious will offer them. And then a lot of us will just then continue to focus on the old belief as opposed to and this is where the present moment, again, we could bring this full conversation full circle. This would be a great opportunity to tune in with your senses, to not be in your thinking mind when your old beliefs are present, to ground yourself into your body so that you're not just strengthening your old belief while you're also trying to build a new belief.
Do you find that there's a certain time or a certain practice that we can do to accentuate that new belief, like during meditation? I believe it's Bruce Lipton that says you can recite the new beliefs as you're falling asleep. You can record yourself and have that playing because of the way the brain is in transition, I think, to a different wave at that time. But I'm just wondering, again, we're not looking for hacks here, but ways that we can expedite this process.
Absolutely. I think during meditation, before sleep, a lot of people experiment with something called binaural beats, or there's ways we can stimulate our brain in our different hemispheres. So stimulating our right and our left, where different actual beats are played in each ear of your earphone. And actually, there's a lot of artists who make affirmations on top of binaural beats and ways that you can pop into like a more guided meditation experience, playing around with different brain waves. So the reason why people are interested in binaural beats is the same idea of meditation. It can help stimulate the way your brain is firing in a particular way, making it more receptive. That's what we're trying to do. Make our subconscious more receptive to a new belief. So whether or not it's before sleep, during meditation, or using one of these guided meditation tools, where some people can even get really savvy and record your own voice, or maybe Google or YouTube a meditation that has affirmations and some of these beats, and you can play that at any time. And the reason, again, why is it's changing the way your brain is firing, because beliefs live in our subconscious mind, and that's what we're really trying to impact. Hypnosis. I actually did a hypnosis session a couple of years ago with someone. That was really cool experience, where it was the same idea, going into a meditative state, and being guided along through different ideas, different beliefs. And again, consistency is always going to be key here. This is for those of us. And this is why I always talk about the practices of, like I was sharing earlier, the embodiment of. This even goes for those of us who have a really strong meditation practice. If we're meditating 5-10 minutes in the morning, and then we don't live in a present way throughout the day, the limits of those 5-10 minutes are very limited, because all of these habits and patterns that we've been talking about live within our day, live when our partner is, approaching us or not approaching us, or we're in relationship with our children, or, my emotions are registering in my body and I'm feeling stressed out. That's when we really want to harness all of these tools we've been talking about, from our consciousness to our body and its ability to become stressed and to regulate itself, to our inner child who carries all of these deep reactions within it. This is when we want to become conscious. So again, emphasizing the consistency of these practices, whether it's new beliefs, rewiring our subconscious, to really expand the practice throughout the day. For a lot of us, it begins with a limited time in the mornings. But again, I just want to highlight the need to have that as a jumping off point.
That's such a good point. And Nicole, I know we got to part ways soon, but before we do, I want to talk about ego and how it fits into this whole conversation we've been having.
I love it. And this is we've built up to this in so many ways, even using language like story and voice in our head. Simple definition of ego is it's the story of you. Again, based in all, you're going to hear very similar language here, based on all of your lived experiences. We have ideas, what we think about ourselves, how we describe ourselves. We have already created, however old it is that you're listening out there, a whole story of you based in everything that's happened to you and how you fit into your relationships and how you fit into your world, as into what your future might look or be like. All of this has been created based on what's already happened to us. And again, our ego lives in our mind as our voice. It's one of those filters. So one of my ego stories, like I've been sharing, is I am not considered, based in a childhood who didn't have emotionally available parents because they themselves were overwhelmed with their own emotions to allow me to be emotionally considered. My ego has created this version of me. I'm a person who walks through the world. I'm not considered. And you know what I did for 20 some plus years? I validated that because I didn't consider myself. I considered my partner. I considered my best friend. I considered that family. And I worried about, just like I've described all along, everyone else. So ego, we all have one. The goal isn't, as some of us think, is to get rid of it. Again, in that story, for me, is value. It's adaptations. It's protection. It's my deepest wounding. It's all of the stuff I've been through. It's only part of, though, my story. So the goal for ego work is to, like all things, become conscious of this voice, of this filter, of how it's determining for a lot of us all of our reactions. If I keep applying the filter of I'm not considered, chances are I'm going to continue to live that reaction. I'm going to be in life as a person who's reacting from a place of not being considered in all of my relationships. So once we become conscious of what our ego is saying and doing and how it's impacting how we are in the world, then we want to learn how to live with it, like we've been talking about, how to hear it, and how to then still allow us, the bigger me, the authentic self, the greater version that is not just limited by your experiences, to be the entity, the space that we're making those choices from.
And I just want to highlight as well, you talk about in the book how our thoughts aren't us. You also say the same thing about the ego. It's a good practice to actually name the ego. I think you call yours Jessica. Yeah, name the ego and realize that this is a separate entity.
Yes. When we give something a name, it's not our own, right? That for a lot of us creates that separation. So we can begin to hear, and you'll begin to see patterns in your own self, in your own ego. When is your ego really active? When are you really, telling yourself or locked in to those stories? And when is it a little less active? And sometimes by giving it a name allows us to create that separation and to begin to see those patterns. So, my ego, Jessica, has played a very big role. It's played a role in keeping me safe, in living in those familiar patterns that were expected of me for a very long time. However, now I can help Jessica along and give her access, give myself access to choices now that are more in alignment. And for me, that means factoring me in, factoring my body, my mind, what I need, what my hopes are, what my wishes are. And this is, again, where we have the conversation of the process of it. It doesn't happen overnight. Some of us might have heard this concept of an ego, and it maybe has remained just the idea of it. And so my suggestion to you is to begin to explore, right? Really see what these stories you're telling yourself are. Anytime you describe yourself or think in terms of I am, begin to pay attention. How are you describing yourself? How are you thinking about yourself? What are you defining yourself as? What identity, right, have you created that you think is making you you? And how comfortable is that identity?
And when it comes to the work, I assume it's not a destination, but a journey, something that we're going to do. I'm sure it's going to evolve and change over the years as we get more, advanced at doing this work. But as we wrap up here, talk about how that does evolve and pivot over the years.
We want to set ourselves up with. And again, this is going to go against, I think, the certainty that most of us are looking for, the static roadmap. Can I just know the 5 things I need to do from now until forever? We don't want to be approaching future in that way, because I'll just speak for myself. We don't actually know what the future holds in terms of what comes next. And B, none of us have been in a body that's any different age than the age it is right now. So I can maybe tune into, as I near my 40s, what does my body need and what do I need emotionally in any given moment? However, as I enter into my 50s and my 60s, my actual needs might change. So going back to that concept of inner guidance, intuition, this is what we're really looking to cultivate within us, because we don't actually have certainty granted to us. We don't know how tomorrow will be or how we'll feel or what our body will even be capable of. Yet what we do know is that we can learn how to tune in to that inner knowing along the way, so that as I enter the unknown of decades to come and maybe new information that is available to us or new relationships or just life as it shifts and it changes, again, I'm looking in the most empowered way possible. I'm looking within for the answers and not just looking to follow that same roadmap that worked at one time, because chances are very likely that it might not continue to work as your actual needs change, evolve, and grow.
Nicole, loved this conversation. The book is How to Do the Work. I'm going to link that up in the show notes, link up your social media, the website, everything. One final question I want to ask as we part ways, and this is something I like to ask. I've done this a handful of times when I've had conversations like this. What about somebody who's listening right now and they feel like, okay, this is all great. I can see the path, at least the beginning, my first steps of how to get going with this. But my story is different. I feel broken. I've been through so much and I don't think this is going to work for me. And I think you said something similar earlier when you found this path. But as somebody who has done the research and worked with clients, and now you're sharing your message, far and wide over the internet, what would you say to that person?
I would say to that person, I think even acknowledging far and wide across the internet, one of the major reasons I came to the internet was to look for connection, for other people who were similar, lived somewhat of a journey, got it, understood, spoke the same language as me. Because we don't live, to speak to your point, we don't live similar journeys. You might not be hearing yourself in my story. However, there might be someone else that is sharing a version of your story. And so for me, looking, because one of the major shifts that I saw in my own life were in my relationships. I was really becoming aware of how not aligned I was and how my relationships, I wasn't honoring myself. And I was looking for a space for new relationships that I could build that were more authentic to me, and that were with people who, understood and were on a similar journey. So a very long-winded way of saying your people and your stories might very well likely be out there. And sometimes, and that's why I shout from the rooftops my story and my journey on social media. And that's why the Self-Healer Circle exists now. Because for me, it was such a passion project because I was looking for the people where I could begin to have some of these conversations and these points of similarity. And I didn't know where to look. And now we all live with access to the internet and to other people and to their journeys. And so I think that the more we're talking and sharing honestly in safe spaces, of course, there might be that community out there or that person out there that is sharing a journey that sounds more similar to yours. Though to speak to your point, yeah, along the way, and even still now, I like to reserve myself as different, as no one gets it. There's still a very real part of me that struggles to allow those points of connection in. So the second thing is to open yourself up. I think a lot of us, we limit ourselves from listening to others. And I think that for a lot of us might be the first step is beginning to listen out to other people in their journeys and to find the points that resonate.
Well, beautiful way to wrap up. Nicole, again, really love this conversation. Appreciate the work you're putting out into the world. Love your vulnerability, and you came on here and just shared so much great knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening.
Take care.